My name is Hattie. I am 55 years old. For 25 years, I raised my son alone. Every sacrifice I made was for him. When he announced his wedding, I gave him $12,500. It was almost everything I had saved. I stood in that reception hall, wearing my best dress, waiting to hear my name. Instead, he pointed to another woman and called her his real mother. Everyone stared at me. I stayed silent. But silence does not mean I did nothing. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you have ever given everything to someone and felt invisible in return, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What I did after that moment changed everything between us. Let me take you back to where it all began. My journey as a single mother started when Derek was just 3 years old. His father Marcus came home one evening and told me he had found someone else. He packed his bags that same night and walked out the door. He never looked back. He never sent a single dollar for his son. He simply vanished from our lives, like we never mattered at all. I remember standing in the doorway of our small apartment, holding Derek in my arms. He was crying because he could sense something was wrong. I was crying too, but I tried to hide it from him. I whispered into his ear that everything would be okay. I made that promise without knowing how I would keep it. Those early years were brutal. I was working as a nursing assistant at a small clinic, making barely enough to cover rent and groceries. I would wake up at 5 in the morning, drop Derek off at my Aunt Marlene's house, and rush to work. After my shift, I would pick him up, feed him dinner, and then study for my nursing exams while he slept beside me on the couch. Aunt Marlene was the only family I had left. My parents passed away when I was in my 20s, and I had no siblings. Marlene stepped in like a guardian angel. She never asked for anything in return. She would watch Derek during my night shifts, read him bedtime stories, and make sure he felt loved when I could not be there. There were nights when I had nothing but bread and butter in the refrigerator. I would make Derek a sandwich and tell him I had already eaten at work. The truth was, I had not eaten anything since breakfast. But watching him enjoy that simple meal made my hunger disappear. His smile was enough to fill me up. I passed my nursing exams on the 3rd try. Each failure felt like the end of the world, but I kept going because giving up was not an option. When I finally got my license, I cried in the bathroom of the testing center for 30 minutes. Not because I was sad, but because I could finally see a future for us. I got a job at a community hospital in Tennessee, and slowly our lives began to improve. We moved into a small house with 2 bedrooms. Derek had his own room for the first time. I decorated it with posters of his favorite cartoon characters and bought him a bookshelf that I filled with second-hand books from the thrift store. Derek was a good kid. He never complained about what we did not have. When other children at school talked about their vacations and new toys, Derek would come home and tell me about his day without a trace of jealousy. He understood even at a young age that our situation was different. I remember teaching him how to ride a bicycle in the park near our house. He fell dozens of times, scraping his knees and elbows, but he never gave up. He kept getting back on that bike until he finally rode all the way across the park without falling. When he reached the other side, he turned around and shouted, "Mom, did you see that?" I clapped so hard my hands hurt. Every night, no matter how exhausted I was from work, I sat with him at the kitchen table to help with his homework. Math was his weakness, so we spent extra time on that. I would make up silly songs to help him remember formulas, and he would laugh and tell me I was the worst singer in the world. But those songs worked. He started getting better grades. I gave up opportunities for myself so that Derek could have more. Once a doctor at the hospital asked me out to dinner. He was kind and successful, and I was tempted to say yes. But Derek was going through a difficult phase at school, and I did not want to bring a new person into his life when he was already struggling. I politely declined. The doctor eventually married someone else, and I never regretted my decision. Derek needed me more than I needed companionship. When it came time for college, I took out loans to pay for his tuition. I worked double shifts on weekends and picked up extra hours whenever I could. Derek got accepted into a good engineering program, and I was determined to make sure he could focus on his studies without worrying about money. The day he graduated, I sat in the audience with tears streaming down my face. He walked across that stage, accepted his diploma, and looked directly at me. After the ceremony, he ran through the crowd to find me. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. He whispered in my ear, "Everything I am is because of you, Mom. Thank you." I believed him. I believed every word. 2 years after graduation, Derek met Priscilla at a company networking event. He called me that night, excited in a way I had never heard before. He said he had met someone special. He said she was beautiful and smart and came from a good family. I was happy for him. I truly was. But something in his voice made me pause. He sounded almost nervous, like he was seeking my approval rather than sharing good news. I met Priscilla for the first time at my house. I spent 2 days cleaning every corner and preparing a home-cooked meal. I made roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and apple pie for dessert. I wanted to impress her. I wanted her to see that even though our home was modest, it was filled with love. Priscilla arrived, wearing an expensive dress and designer shoes. She was polite, but her eyes wandered around my living room in a way that made me uncomfortable. She complimented the meal, but barely touched her plate, saying she was watching her carbohydrates. Derek sat beside her, watching her reaction to everything more than he watched me. After dinner, Derek walked Priscilla to her car while I cleared the table. Through the kitchen window, I saw them talking. Priscilla gestured toward my house and shook her head slightly. Derek nodded and put his arm around her. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself she was just nervous meeting her boyfriend's mother. But a small seed of doubt planted itself in my heart that night. A few months after that dinner, Derek invited me to meet Priscilla's family. I was nervous but excited. Meeting the parents of the person your child loves is a significant moment. I wanted to make a good impression. Their home was in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Nashville. The driveway alone was longer than my entire street. The house was enormous with white columns and manicured gardens. I felt small before I even walked through the front door. Lorraine greeted me at the entrance. She was impeccably dressed with pearl earrings and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Gerald shook my hand firmly, but quickly turned his attention to Derek, asking about his work and his career goals. I stood there holding the bottle of wine I had brought as a gift, feeling like a stranger at someone else's party. During dinner, Lorraine asked me questions about my life. When I mentioned that I was a nurse at a community hospital, she tilted her head and said, "Oh, that must be exhausting work. Priscilla has never had to worry about such things. We made sure she could pursue her passions without financial stress." The comment stung, but I smiled and nodded. Derek seemed different in their house. He laughed louder at Gerald's jokes. He agreed with everything Lorraine said. He barely looked at me throughout the entire meal. At one point, Lorraine showed everyone photos from their recent trip to Europe. She talked about the hotels they stayed, in the restaurants they visited, the art they saw. I had nothing to contribute. I had never been to Europe. I had never even left the country. After that dinner, something shifted. Derek started spending more time at the Priscilla's family home. He would call me less frequently, and when he did, the conversations were shorter. He would say he was busy with work, but I saw on social media that he was attending parties and events with Lorraine and Gerald. Lorraine began posting photos of Derek on her social media accounts. She called him her son in the captions. She wrote about how proud she was of him, how he was like family to her. I scrolled through those photos late at night, looking at my son smiling beside a woman who was not his mother, and I felt something inside me crack. One evening, I noticed that Derek had started dressing differently. His clothes were more expensive, his haircut more polished. He talked about brands and restaurants I had never heard of. He mentioned weekend getaways and golf outings with Gerald. My son, who used to be content with simple things, was becoming someone I did not recognize. I tried to talk to him about it once. I called him and asked if we could have dinner together, just the two of us. He hesitated before saying he would check his schedule. A week passed before he got back to me. He said he could squeeze in lunch on a Sunday, but only for an hour because he had plans with the Priscilla's family afterward. That lunch was awkward. Derek checked his phone constantly. He talked about things I could not relate to. When I asked about our traditions like watching old movies together on holidays, he shrugged and said those things seemed childish now. I paid for the meal even though he made 3 times my salary. He did not offer to split the bill. He did not even thank me. My 54th birthday arrived on a cold November evening. I prepared dinner for 2, set the table with candles, and waited for Derek. He had promised to come. He had looked me in the eye the week before and said he would be there. By 7:00 he had not arrived. I called him. No answer. I sent a text message. No response. At 8 my phone finally buzzed. It was a message from Derek. Sorry, Mom, totally forgot. I am at a dinner party at Lorraine's. One of her friends is celebrating something. I will make it up to you. I read that message 3 times. Totally forgot. My son had totally forgotten my birthday because he was at a party for one of Lorraine's friends. I sat at that table alone, looking at the empty chair across from me, and I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made pressing down on my chest. I did not cry that night. I was too tired to cry. I simply cleared the table, put the food in the refrigerator, and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and went to work like nothing had happened. I did not mention my birthday to anyone. I did not want sympathy. I just wanted to understand how my son, the boy I had raised alone for 25 years, could forget the day I was born. Aunt Marlene called me that evening to wish me a belated happy birthday. She could tell from my voice that something was wrong. I lied and said I was just tired from work. She did not push. She simply said she loved me and that I should take care of myself. I hung up and stared at the wall until I fell asleep on the couch. 3 months before the wedding, Derek called me with news. He and Priscilla were engaged. He sounded happy, but he did not ask for my blessing. He did not ask what I thought. He simply informed me like I was a distant relative rather than his mother. I congratulated him. I told him I was happy for him. I asked when the wedding would be and offered to help with the planning. Derek said Lorraine was handling most of the details, but there would be a meeting soon to discuss everything. I would be invited. The meeting took place at Lorraine's house, of course. I arrived with a notebook full of ideas. I had written down suggestions for the ceremony, the flowers, the music. I had a list of relatives and friends I thought should be invited. I had spent hours preparing because I wanted to contribute something meaningful to my son's wedding. Lorraine had other plans. She sat at the head of the table with a leather binder full of spreadsheets and photographs. She had already chosen the venue, the caterer, the florist, and the photographer. She had designed the invitations and selected the color scheme. When I tried to offer my suggestions, she smiled and said, "That is sweet, Hattie, but we have already finalized everything. We hired a professional wedding planner." I looked at Derek, waiting for him to speak up for me. He avoided my eyes. He sat beside Priscilla, nodding along with everything Lorraine said. I asked about the guest list. I handed Lorraine my list of names. She glanced at it briefly and said, "We need to keep the wedding intimate and elegant. I am afraid we cannot accommodate everyone." She crossed out most of my family members and friends. Only Aunt Marlene and 2 cousins made the cut. I wanted to protest. I wanted to stand up and demand that my family be included in my son's wedding. But Derek put his hand on Lorraine's arm and said, "Mom, it is fine. We just want to keep things simple." Simple. He called excluding my family simple. I left that meeting feeling like I had been erased. Lorraine had taken over my son's wedding, and Derek had let her. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. A week later, Derek called me. His voice was hesitant. He said that the wedding expenses were higher than expected. Gerald and Lorraine had contributed a significant amount, but there was still a gap. He asked if I could help. I asked how much. He paused for a long moment. Then he said, "About $12,500. I did not respond immediately. That amount was almost everything I had saved over the past decade. It was my emergency fund, my safety net, the money I had set aside for unexpected medical bills or repairs to my house. Giving it away would leave me vulnerable, but Derek was my son. This was his wedding. I said yes without asking any more questions. The next day I went to the bank and withdrew the money. I also took out a small loan to cover the difference. I sold my mother's ring, the only piece of jewelry I had inherited from her, to a pawn shop for $800. It broke my heart to let it go, but I told myself it was worth it for Derek's happiness. I transferred the money to Derek's account. He sent me a text message saying thank you. Not a phone call, not a visit, just 2 words on a screen. My colleague Joyce noticed that I stopped wearing my ring to work. She asked about it casually one day in the break room. I told her I had misplaced it. She looked at me with concern, but did not press further. I was grateful for that. I did not want to explain that I had sold my mother's ring to pay for a wedding where I was barely welcomed. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I received no updates from Derek. I learned about the details through social media posts from Lorraine and Priscilla. The venue was a beautiful garden estate outside Nashville. The flowers were imported from Holland. The menu featured dishes I could not pronounce. Everything looked expensive and perfect. I was not asked to help with any of the preparations. I was not invited to the dress fittings or the cake tastings or the rehearsal dinners. I existed on the periphery, a name on a guest list, rather than the mother of the groom. I told myself it would be different at the actual wedding. I told myself that Derek would acknowledge me in front of everyone. He would thank me for raising him alone, for sacrificing everything, for giving him the life that led him to this moment. I held on to that hope like a lifeline. The morning of the wedding arrived. I woke up before dawn, unable to sleep from a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep blue gown that I thought made me look elegant. It had cost me $200 more than I had ever spent on a single piece of clothing, but I wanted to look my best for my son's special day. Aunt Marlene came to my house early so we could drive to the venue together. She told me I looked beautiful. She squeezed my hand and said she was proud of me. Her words meant more than she knew. We arrived at the garden estate just as the other guests were beginning to gather. The venue was stunning. White chairs lined a green lawn that led to an archway covered in roses. In the distance, a white tent had been set up for the reception. Everything looked like a photograph from a wedding magazine. I searched for someone to guide me to my seat. A young woman with a clipboard approached and asked for my name. When I told her, she checked her list and pointed me toward the seating area. I walked down the aisle expecting to find my place in the front row. I was seated in the 3rd row. The front row was reserved for Lorraine Gerald and their closest friends. I stared at the empty seats ahead of me, trying to understand. I was the mother of the groom. I should have been in the front. I should have been in the place of honor. Aunt Marlene sat beside me and whispered that there must have been a mistake. I shook my head. I knew it was not a mistake. Lorraine had planned every detail of this wedding. She knew exactly where she had placed me. The ceremony began. Priscilla walked down the aisle on Gerald's arm, looking radiant in a designer gown. Derek stood at the altar, his face beaming with joy. He looked so handsome in his tailored suit. My son, the boy I had raised alone, was about to become a husband. Pastor William led the ceremony. He spoke about love commitment and the joining of 2 families. When he asked who gave this woman to be married, Gerald answered with pride. No one mentioned the man who should have been standing there. No one mentioned me. During the vows, Derek spoke about his journey to this moment. He thanked God for bringing Priscilla into his life. He thanked Gerald for teaching him about success. He did not mention his mother. He did not look in my direction once. I sat in my seat, hands folded in my lap, watching my son marry a woman whose family had systematically replaced me. Aunt Marlene reached over and held my hand. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Her grip said everything. The ceremony ended with a kiss. Everyone applauded. Derek and Priscilla walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. When they passed my row, Derek glanced at me briefly and smiled. It was the first time he had acknowledged me all day. The reception was held under the white tent. Round tables covered in white linen surrounded a dance floor. A live band played soft music as guests mingled with champagne glasses. I found my assigned table near the back, far from the head table, where Derek and Priscilla sat with Lorraine and Gerald. I ate my dinner in silence. The food was exquisite, but I could not taste it. I watched my son laugh with his new family, posing for photographs, accepting congratulations from people I did not know. I felt like a ghost at my own son's wedding. Then came the speeches. The band stopped playing. The master of ceremonies called for everyone's attention. He announced that the groom wanted to say a few words. Derek stood up, microphone in hand. He looked around the room with a broad smile. My heart beat faster. This was it. This was the moment he would thank me. This was when he would tell everyone about the sacrifices his mother had made. Derek began by thanking everyone for coming. He thanked the wedding planner for creating such a beautiful event. He thanked Gerald for welcoming him into the family and for teaching him what it meant to be a successful man. Then he paused. He looked toward the head table where Lorraine was sitting. And now, Derek said, I want to thank the woman who has been like a real mother to me. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned forward in my chair. Lorraine, Derek continued, pointing directly at her, you have shown me what a real family looks like. You have loved me like your own son. I cannot imagine my life without you. Thank you for everything. The room erupted in applause. Lorraine stood up, tears streaming down her face, and embraced Derek. They held each other while cameras flashed and guests cheered. I sat frozen in my seat. The words echoed in my head. Real mother. He had called her his real mother. In front of everyone. In front of the people who knew I had raised him alone for 25 years. In front of Aunt Marlene, who had helped me through the darkest times. He had looked at another woman and called her his real mother. People turned to look at me. I could see the confusion on some faces, the pity on others. Whispers spread across the tables. I heard fragments of conversations. Is that not his actual mother? Did he really just say that? How embarrassing for her. Aunt Marlene gripped my arm. Her eyes were red with anger. She started to stand ready to confront Derek, but I pulled her back down. Not here, I whispered. Not now. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not run away. I sat in that chair with my spine straight and my head held high. Inside, I was shattering into 1,000 pieces, but I refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. The reception continued as if nothing had happened. The band started playing again. People returned to their conversations and their champagne. Derek danced with Lorraine while Priscilla danced with Gerald. I watched from my table at the back, holding the gift I had brought for my son. It was a wooden box containing my grandfather's pocket watch. The watch had been passed down through 3 generations. I had planned to give it to Derek as a symbol of our family's history, of the legacy I had tried to preserve, despite everything. Now, holding that box, I knew it did not belong here. I made my decision quietly. There was no dramatic moment, no confrontation in front of the guests. I simply stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the gift table. I picked up the wooden box that I had placed there earlier. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. Aunt Marlene followed me. She did not ask questions. She simply walked beside me, her presence a silent support. As I neared the edge of the tent, I heard Derek's voice behind me. Mom, where are you going? I stopped, but did not turn around. I could hear the confusion in his voice, perhaps even a hint of guilt. But it was too late for guilt. The words had already been spoken. They could not be taken back. Home, I said. My voice was calm, steady. I am going home. But the reception is not over, Derek said. We have not even cut the cake yet. I finally turned to face him. He stood there in his expensive suit, looking at me with an expression I could not read. Was it concern, annoyance? I did not know anymore. I was not sure I wanted to know. "Enjoy your celebration," I said. "You have your real family here with you." I walked away without waiting for a response. Aunt Marlene stayed close behind me. Neither of us looked back. The drive home was silent. Aunt Marlene drove because my hands were shaking too much to hold the steering wheel. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching the wooden box, staring out the window at the passing lights. When we reached my house, Aunt Marlene came inside with me. She made tea while I sat at the kitchen table, still in my blue dress, still holding that box. "You did the right thing," Aunt Marlene said, placing a cup in front of me. "Leaving with dignity." I nodded, but did not speak. I was not ready for words yet. That night, after Aunt Marlene left, I sat down at my desk and began to write. I wrote a letter to Derek. Not an angry letter, not a letter full of accusations and blame. Just the truth, the whole truth about what it had taken to raise him. I wrote about the nights I went hungry so he could eat. I wrote about the jobs I worked, the shifts. I covered the exhaustion I hid behind smiles. I wrote about selling his grandmother's ring to pay for a wedding where I was treated as an afterthought. I wrote about every sacrifice, not to make him feel guilty, but to make him understand what he had dismissed with those two words, real mother. At the end of the letter, I wrote, "I do not need you to apologize right now. I need you to understand what you did. I love you, Derek. I will always love you. But I also love myself. And I deserve better than what you gave me today." I sealed the letter in an envelope and addressed it to his apartment. I also printed out a detailed receipt of the $12,500 I had contributed to the wedding. At the bottom I wrote, "This is what your mother gave, not for recognition, not for thanks, just so you would know." I mailed both items the next morning. 3 days passed before Derek called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. "Mom, I got your letter. I think you are overreacting. Can we talk?" I did not call him back. Instead, I sent a text message. "When you are ready to have an honest conversation, I will be here. Until then, I need space." A week later, Lorraine sent me a message. She wrote, "I hope you are not still upset about the wedding. Derek loves you in his own way. Perhaps you are being too sensitive about this." I blocked her number. Gerald tried next. He called my house phone, speaking in his business voice, suggesting that we should all meet to smooth things over. I told him politely but firmly that I had nothing to discuss with him. Then I blocked his number too. I set new boundaries. I told Derek through a brief email that I would not be giving money for any future expenses. I would not be attending events where I was treated as a second-class guest. If he wanted me in his life, he needed to show respect through his actions, not just his words. He did not respond to that email. I was not surprised. The weeks after the wedding were difficult, but they were also clarifying. Without the constant effort of trying to maintain a relationship with Derek, I found myself with more time and energy for other things. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital. The work was hard, but it felt good to be useful, to be needed. My patients appreciated me. My colleagues respected me. In those sterile hallways, I remembered who I was, beyond being Derek's mother. Joyce invited me to join her book club. I had never been much of a reader, but I said yes anyway. The group met every other Wednesday at a coffee shop downtown. We discussed novels, but we also talked about our lives, our struggles, our triumphs. For the first time in years, I had friends who knew nothing about Derek or his wedding or my heartbreak. They knew me as Hattie the nurse, with the warm smile who made excellent lemon bars. I also reconnected with Patricia, a friend from high school who had moved back to Tennessee after her divorce. We met for lunch one Saturday, and it felt like no time had passed at all. Patricia was funny and honest, and did not judge me when I told her about the wedding. She just shook her head and said, "Some people do not realize what they have until it is gone." Patricia and I started traveling together on weekends. Nothing fancy, just day trips to nearby towns. We visited antique shops and ate at small diners and laughed about things that had nothing to do with our problems. Those trips reminded me that there was a whole world outside of my pain. Aunt Marlene was my constant support. She checked on me every few days, sometimes bringing homemade soup, sometimes just sitting with me in comfortable silence. She never said "I told you so," even though she had sensed trouble with Derek long before I was willing to admit it. I started taking a pottery class at the community center. Working with clay was meditative. I could focus entirely on the shape forming beneath my hands, forgetting everything else for an hour at a time. I was not very good at first. My bowls were lopsided, my vases uneven. But improvement came slowly, and with it a quiet pride in creating something with my own hands. 3 months after the wedding, I heard through the grapevine that things were not going well for Derek. Gerald's car dealerships had run into financial trouble. The economy had shifted and sales were down. Lorraine was no longer throwing lavish parties. The family that had seemed so glamorous and secure was struggling. Joyce told me she had heard from a friend of a friend that Priscilla was unhappy. She had expected a certain lifestyle, and Derek was not delivering it. He was working longer hours, taking on freelance projects in addition to his regular job, trying to keep up with expenses that had ballooned during their courtship. I listened to this news without satisfaction. I did not wish hardship on my son. I simply noted that the family he had chosen over me was not as perfect as it had appeared. 4 months after the wedding, Derek called me. His voice sounded different, tired, uncertain. He asked if we could meet. I agreed, but I set the terms. We would meet at a coffee shop, not at my house and not at his apartment. I would bring no gifts and no expectations. This was not a reconciliation. It was a conversation. He arrived looking thinner than I remembered. There were dark circles under his eyes. He ordered black coffee and sat across from me, staring at his cup for a long moment before speaking. "Things are not what I thought they would be," he said finally. I waited. "Lorraine has changed since Gerald's business started failing," he continued. "She is not as welcoming anymore. She keeps making comments about how I should be providing more for Priscilla, and Priscilla agrees with her." I sipped my tea and said nothing. "I realize now that they were different when they thought I was going somewhere," Derek said. "When they thought I was a rising star they could show off. Now that things are harder, they look at me differently." "And how do they look at you?" I asked. He met my eyes for the first time. Like I am not enough. I let the silence stretch between us. I wanted him to sit with that feeling. I wanted him to understand what it meant to be found lacking by people you thought loved you unconditionally. "I am sorry," Derek said, "about the wedding, about what I said. I did not mean it the way it sounded." "How did you mean it?" He struggled to answer. "I do not know. I was caught up in everything. Lorraine made me feel like I belonged somewhere important. She made me feel successful. I got lost in that." I nodded slowly. "And where does that leave us?" "I want to fix things," Fiancé, he said. "I want you back in my life, Mum. The real you. Not just as someone I call when I need something." I looked at my son across that table. I saw the little boy I had raised, the one who used to make me birthday cards with crooked drawings. I also saw the man who had publicly dismissed me as his mother in favor of a woman who valued status over substance. "I forgive you," I said. "But forgiveness does not mean we go back to the way things were." Derek looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that trust is rebuilt through actions, not words. You called Lorraine your real mother in front of everyone. You cannot unsay that. But you can show me over time that you understand what you did and that you are committed to doing better." He nodded, his eyes wet. "I can do that. I want to do that." "Then we start slow," I said. "No promises, no expectations, just one step at a time." We finished our coffee in relative silence. When we stood to leave, Derek hugged me. It was brief and awkward, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps, or maybe just a pause before another disappointment. I did not know yet, but I was willing to find out. 6 months have passed since that conversation at the coffee shop. My life looks different now than it did a year ago. Not easier necessarily, but clearer. I know what I want and what I will not accept. Those boundaries have given me a peace I did not know I was missing. I still work at the hospital. The patients keep me grounded. There is something humbling about caring for people in their most vulnerable moments. It reminds me that everyone carries pain, that everyone needs kindness, that no one is defined by their worst moments or their biggest mistakes. My friendships have deepened. Patricia and I took a week-long trip to the coast last month. We rented a small cabin near the beach and spent our days walking on the sand and our evenings cooking simple meals together. One night we sat on the porch watching the sunset, and Patricia said, "You seem lighter now, Hattie, like you finally put down something heavy." She was right. I had been carrying the weight of Derek's choices for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The pottery class has become a highlight of my week. I made a set of mugs that I am actually proud of. I gave one to Aunt Marlene, and she uses it every morning for her coffee. Seeing my creation in her hands, knowing I made something beautiful from nothing, fills me with a satisfaction I cannot quite describe. Derek has been visiting more often. He comes alone now without Priscilla. He tells me their marriage is struggling. Priscilla is unhappy with the smaller apartment they moved into, the budget they have, to follow the lifestyle adjustments they have had to make. Derek is trying to hold things together, but he seems exhausted. I do not offer advice. I do not say I told you so. I simply listen. Sometimes that is what a mother does. Not fix, not lecture, just be present. Last week, Derek came over on a Sunday afternoon. He brought lunch sandwiches he had made himself. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had waited alone on my 54th birthday, and we talked. Not about his problems or his marriage, just about regular things. Movies he had seen, a book he was reading, a hiking trail he wanted to try. At one point, he looked around my kitchen and said, "I like what you have done with the place. It feels warm." I smiled. "It always has been. You just forgot for a while." He did not argue. He just nodded and took another bite of his sandwich. I do not know what the future holds for Derek and me. I do not know if his marriage will survive or if he will learn the lessons he needs to learn. What I do know is that I cannot live my life waiting for him to become the son I hoped he would be. I have to live for myself. I have to find joy in my own days, build my own community, create my own meaning. The $12,500 I spent on his wedding is gone. I will never get it back, but I have gained something more valuable. I have gained clarity. I have gained self-respect. I have gained the knowledge that my worth is not determined by how my son treats me or what his in-laws think of me. I am enough. I have always been enough. If you are watching this and you have experienced something similar, I want you to know that you are not alone. Parents pour everything into their children, and sometimes those children forget. Sometimes they get swept up in new families, new priorities, new definitions of success. It hurts. It hurts more than almost anything else. But here is what I have learned. You cannot control how others treat you, but you can control how you respond. You can set boundaries. You can protect your peace. You can love someone and still walk away when they disrespect you. Those things are not contradictions. They are survival. I want to thank you for listening to my story today. If it touched you in any way, please leave a comment below, sharing your own experience. Have you ever given everything to someone and felt invisible in return? How did you find your way back to yourself? I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you found value in this story, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss future stories. Share this video with someone who might need to hear these words today. You never know who is struggling in silence, waiting for permission to put themselves first. To everyone watching, wherever you are in the world, I wish you peace. I wish you the courage to set boundaries and the strength to keep them. I wish you people in your life who see your worth, without you having to prove it over and over again. You are enough. You have always been enough. Never let anyone, not even the people you love most, make you forget that. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, it is never too late to start writing a new chapter of your own story.